Michael Waldman was in the White House the last time this happened. He was President Clinton's chief speechwriter and now runs the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law. And Michael, I want to pick up sort of where Luke was leaving off there. He said the Republican caucus is remarkably calm today. And in fact, you had Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn today going on and talking up, sort of praising the impact of the government shutdown. Let's hear from her.
See a partial shutdown for several days. But, Steve, people are probably going to realize they can live with a lot less government than what they thought they needed.
So Republicans are kind of happy about the shutdown right now. I spoke to one member of Congress who represents a district with a lot of federal government employees. He and his office were not hearing a lot from constituents. So where is the pressure going to come from that would actually force a deal here?
Well, it's a great question. And, you know, Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. You see a lot of the themes and a lot of the self-delusion in this Republican rump that you saw in the House Republicans back in 1995 and 1996. They were sure then that government was so unpopular that the public would cheer the idea that it was shut down. I don't think they're quite as expecting that as they are thinking that the political market has almost priced their craziness into it. We're used to the dysfunction of government. We're used to the hyper-partisanship and the polarization, and so they think they can sort of live with the costs. I think that it's not so much the Tea Party hopefuls and faithful, but those conservative but less doctrinaire Republicans who will start to feel the pressure. And, you know, maybe this is all a way to get the really utterly catastrophic prospect of the debt ceiling not being raised, to make it easier to do that. This would be John Boehner's secret public service that we're just seeing unfold without realizing it.
So you're saying one part of the caucus is going to have to take power back from the other part. Part of that's going to come from pressure from the American people, from the president, who was out earlier today with a message that was both tough and funny.
They don't get to hold the entire economy hostage over ideological demands. A couple of weeks ago, Apple rolled out a new mobile operating system. And within days, they found a glitch, so they fixed it. I don't remember anybody suggesting Apple should stop selling iPhones or iPads, or threatening to shut down the company if they didn't.
If you were writing for the president right now, what would you want him to say the next time he comes out to speak to America?
See, I still haven't upgraded because I want my Google Maps, so that whole example confused me. I think people in the din of events these days don't listen to the presidential bully pulpit the way they might have in earlier decades. But when there's a crisis, they do. And it's pretty rare to have a crisis about domestic politics. So this is a chance for him to talk to the public and be heard more than he might otherwise. Today was a little bit of a necessarily funny mixed message, because he was also launching Obamacare. He was launching the Affordable Care Act and the exchanges. So on the one hand, he was sternly saying they shall not pass, they shall not shut the government down. And then he was surrounded by ordinary citizens saying, well, and by the way, healthcare is still open.
Right.
And it looked a little bit like the cold opening on Saturday Night Live. Yep. It just looked like another generic, healthcare event. I think that he needs to keep at not just saying I'm the grown-up in the room, people should stop shutting the government down, but make the broader point about the role of government and ideological extremism. The White House could be too sanguine if they assume the blame will fall on these conservative Republicans. If you look at the newspaper front pages around the country today, I realize that's a little retro, but if you look at the Newseum website and look at the front pages of the newspapers, they're all sort of saying gridlock, Congress shuts down government, and a half-attentive member of the public wouldn't really necessarily realize how extreme, how out of the ordinary this is.
Right.
So he needs to be stern and a little bit of battle stations. I wouldn't be too far from the White House during a moment like this.
Yeah, Michael, say more about that, because people say, well, first draft of history is the press. Sometimes the first draft of history is the big addresses by presidents. And this is a big listening moment for the country. To your point, a lot of the newspapers and a lot of the narrative defaults back to saying, well, gridlock, no compromise. They're not talking. The Washington Post has had some articles to that effect, and some better ones I should mention. How do you bridge from that as a presidential communicator back to the underlying facts of this disagreement? Number one, that there is a majority to fund this government if Boehner would allow a vote. Number two, that as we mentioned, Boehner himself has said this is a terrible idea. What we're doing today, he's against. And number three, healthcare is law. Deal with it.
Yeah, it's a bit challenging. When I was doing this work with President Clinton as his chief speechwriter during the shutdowns then, he would go into the briefing room and he would sort of hit a volley across the net and say what his demands were. And then Newt Gingrich, the Speaker of the House, he would hold a press conference down Pennsylvania Avenue and he would say what his response was. But they were really fighting about a budget. Congress passed a budget, the president vetoed it, and there was a broad substantive ideological disagreement. The challenge here is how does he make that ideological case? How does he make the philosophical point when there's nobody to negotiate with, when he's just got the nihilist caucus of the House to address? Right. I think he's got to keep this line over and over. Vote to reopen the government. Right. Vote to reopen the government. And don't target the craziest of the crazies. Target the reasonable members.
Well, and Michael, what's going on behind closed doors? The White House, we've mentioned that it's relatively calm on the Hill, but as someone that was in the thick of things in the last shutdown that lasted 27 days with President Clinton, walk us through what is likely going on behind those doors. Was there demonizing? Was there panic?
Well, it was interesting. First of all, as history knows, they sent a lot of the staff home, and a lot of the work was done by interns. And so things got, as it turned out, a little more interesting probably than any of us realized at the time. It was a small group, and there was a lot of realization that the strategy in what he said was really a big part of negotiating in public. But you also have a lot of pressure on any president to really try to stand up for and take care of the American people. Even with Clinton, now we look back and say, wow, that was a huge political triumph. It wasn't clear at the time that it was a triumph. Right. And inside the White House, there were meetings, I remember, where Vice President Gore and Leon Panetta, who was the White House chief of staff, had been up negotiating. And there was a lot of concern about the real people who were being hurt at the time by the shutdown. I think now, though, there's got to be less pressure internally to make a deal because there's no deal to be made. Then there was, well, we'll take this tax, we'll take that spending cut, let's split the difference. There's no way to split the difference as far as I can see with what's going on right now. So it's not exactly the same, but I'm sure there's a lot of late nights and caffeine-fueled writing sessions.
Well, at least this time we're unlikely to have the same sort of intern problem. Michael Waldman, thank you very much for your insights.